by Russia in Ukraine against healthcare, affecting health workers, facilities, ambulances, and medical warehouses. There are numerous UN investigative reports that detail widespread war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russia in Ukraine. Let Russia and its allies remember, accountability for all atrocities committed is not optional. It doesn't have an expiration date. Latvia consistently has been calling on Russia to provide full and unimpeded access to occupied territories, and Russia itself, for UN agencies and international monitors. In every meeting, Latvia has stressed the dire situation in the occupied territories. In February, Latvia underscored again the forcibly transferred Ukrainian children and militarization of Ukrainian children in the occupied territories. In March, we drew the attention to the widespread torture against prisoners of war and civilian detainees taking place in Russia's detention facilities, including in the occupied territories. In April, we highlighted the ethnic, political, and religious persecution of Crimean Tatars, who make up the majority of the political prisoners in occupied Crimea. Last Tuesday, we raised the unacceptable situation in the occupied village of Oleshki, where due to Russian drone attacks and mined roads, civilians are trapped in the village with limited food supplies and no drinking water. Mr. President, it is outright cynical and shameful that Russia has called this meeting today. It is obvious that for Russia, international humanitarian law matters only when it fits its imperialistic goals. Only when Russia will fully cooperate with the UN system and independent monitors, there can be a meaningful engagement. So far, there are only attacks on the UN system and independent monitors. Internet blackout imposed on its own population and repression of independent media. So my message is clear. Russia started this war in 2014. Russia can end it. Leave Luhansk, leave Donetsk, leave Sevastopol, leave Mariupol, and let the Ukrainian people live in peace as they did before. Unconditional ceasefire is the first step to achieve a just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the United States.
And thank you to our briefers today. We are following the reports of those killed and wounded in Luhansk overnight. Many questions concerning this attack remain outstanding. The United States again calls for Russia to allow humanitarian workers to access areas under its control. While we await answers to those questions, we underscore the need for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire as a means toward a durable, negotiated end to the war. This death and destruction must stop now. The United States once again calls on the Russian Federation and Ukraine to end the war, in which millions of people have suffered. We urge you to negotiate in good faith to end this violence. Out of your duty to protect and preserve the lives of your citizens, the fact that I even have to note this highlights the obscene absurdity of our situation. As President Trump has clearly and succinctly stated, I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people. The United States remains committed to a diplomatic solution and will do whatever it can to bring the war to a durable end. Lastly, we reaffirm our support of our fellow Security Council members and take note of the letter circulated yesterday by Latvia. It is also worth reiterating, the United States fulfills our commitments to NATO. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the briefers. We have seen the reports cited by the Russian Federation regarding an alleged drone hit in Starobilsk, Ukrainian territory currently under temporary Russian occupation. At this stage, as we have heard from the briefers, the incident has not been objectively or independently verified. And as Russia refuses to allow any independent verification, we may sadly never get this. The United Kingdom deplores any loss of civilian life or injury, particularly to children. As we and others have noted this week, we should condemn all civilian harm wherever it occurs, and we do. The protection of civilians is a core principle of international humanitarian law. In that context, we must also be clear that there would be no civilian deaths if Russia had not launched its illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As a direct result, Ukraine is subjected to daily sustained bombardment. Since Russia has brought us here today to focus on civilian casualties, let's do that. Today is the 22nd day of this month. In the 22 days so far, Russia has killed at least 170 Ukrainian civilians, including today, when Russian drones hit a residential area in the heart of Dnipro, injuring at least 20 people, including a 9-month-old girl and a 6-year-old boy who are still receiving care. Yesterday, when a Russian daytime attack hit 8 residential buildings, with the attacks injuring at least 19 people, including 3 children. And the day before that, when Russia launched attacks hitting residential buildings, killing at least 8 people and injuring 52 others across the country. And this all comes just days after Russia unleashed the most intense aerial bombardment, the most intense aerial assault of the war so far. In Kiev, Ukrainian authorities report that 24 people were killed and 47 injured, including children, when a residential building was struck in Kiev. I could go on. May is on track to surpass the record high number of civilian casualties that Russia inflicted upon Ukraine in April, as they continue to launch coordinated attacks on critical infrastructure. We should all be focused on preventing the loss of innocent lives. And the truth is that we would not be sitting here today if Russia had opted for diplomacy instead of aggression, in 2022 or at any point since then. Indeed, they continue to reject diplomacy. It was this delegation which, just days ago, egregiously threatened Latvia, another council member in this very chamber. If Russia truly wished to protect civilians, it would agree to the ceasefire. The ceasefire that Ukraine and the rest of the world has been calling for, or better yet, it would end this war outright. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to Colombia.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting. I thank the Director of the Crisis Response Division of OCHA, Ms. Edem Osonu, the Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict, Ms. Vanessa Fraser, and Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Mr. Ted Chaiban, for their detailed briefings. I also extend my greetings to the delegations participating in today's meeting. Colombia notes with great concern the recent escalation of this conflict and the reports of attacks that continue to affect the civilian population and civilian infrastructure, including educational facilities. In a week in which this Council and the membership have practically in unison reiterated the urgent need to strengthen our commitments to the protection of civilians, what we continue to see on the ground is deeply concerning. Colombia has been clear in its message. Attacks against civilians and civilian objects are unacceptable, wherever they may come from. Schools, universities, and places of learning must never become theaters of war. And the same goes for humanitarian facilities, hospitals, collection centers, or any other place that is essential for the civilian population. International humanitarian law is not optional, nor does it allow for selective application. It is a legal obligation enshrined in numerous international instruments and, furthermore, strengthened by the political commitments made by states. The parties must respect and uphold these obligations. Regrettably, today, the facts demonstrate that this appeal is not being heeded. Colombia expresses its profound concern over the escalation in the means and methods of war in this conflict, including the growing and incremental use of drones and their convergence with new technologies. The evolution of technology does nothing to change legal obligations. The use of these systems cannot come at the expense of the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. In a context in which there is already clear disrespect for international humanitarian law, the use of these technologies raises additional concerns, particularly when they can weaken the capacity to distinguish between military targets and the civilian population. Mr. President, Colombia reiterates that the priority must be peace. This conflict will find no solution in a greater escalation or in successive retaliations or the normalization of attacks that continue to claim civilian lives. There is an urgent need to resume dialogue, re-establish active, functional channels of communication that are focused on achieving concrete results and also making progress with confidence-building measures that make it possible to reduce the suffering and open up spaces, real spaces for de-escalation. Colombia reiterates its appeal for an immediate ceasefire, not a symbolic one, but a real one, as a first step towards stopping the violence and creating the conditions for moving towards a just and lasting peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is following with grave concern the continued deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation in Ukraine, as well as the continued expansion of the effects of this war on the civilian population, essential infrastructure, and the prospects for a peaceful settlement. My delegation would like to thank the briefers for their briefings, which once again recall the urgent need for a responsible mobilization on the part of this Council for the protection of civilians, for de-escalation, and to find a just, lasting, and credible peace. Mr. President, recent reports of a drone attack that hit a establishment housing minors and students in Starobelsk in the region of Luhansk are deeply concerning. 72 hours after our last intervention, the fears that we expressed on the subject of this drawn-out conflict and its repercussions for the civilian population have unfortunately been echoed in the tragedy that has just occurred. You will recall that my delegation drew the attention of this Council on Tuesday to the fact that recent developments in this conflict illustrated a dangerous trend, and this latest attack confirms that trend. The longer this war continues, the more fragile the line between the battlefield and the civilian space becomes, exposing the population to increasingly serious suffering. The Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to firmly recall that the protection of civilians in conflict remains a sacrosanct principle that cannot be contravened nor contextualized by any logic of war or any military consideration. No response can justify the fact that children and schools are attacked. The protection of civilians cannot be selective. It is incumbent upon all parties in all circumstances, in accordance with international law, international humanitarian law, and the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations. The Democratic Republic of the Congo recalls once again that there can be no military solution to this conflict. Dialogue and diplomacy represent the only paths towards a lasting settlement of this conflict, for the sake of the population that has suffered all too much. In this regard, my delegation invites all of the parties to exercise restraint and to pursue de-escalation, and this council, invite this council to encourage all mediation efforts that are being taken, including by partners. My delegation also recalls that rapid, safe, sustainable and unhindered humanitarian access must be guaranteed for all persons in need. Humanitarian personnel, medical workers, rescue workers, and infrastructure and relief and rescue infrastructure must be protected in all circumstances. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, in this regard, encourages all initiatives that could reduce tensions, preserve the channels of communication between the parties, and steadily rebuild trust. The recent prisoner exchanges demonstrate that dialogue remains possible, even in a context of profound confrontation. Mr. President, faced with the suffering of the civilian population, our collective responsibility cannot be one of indifference, of polarization, or of resignation. It must be that of restraint, of responsibility, and of the sincere pursuit of peace. The Democratic Republic of the Congo therefore calls upon the parties to set aside the logic of confrontation, to strictly comply with their international obligations, to spare the civilian population, and to, with determination, prioritize the path of diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation. To conclude, my delegation reaffirms its commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, respect for international law, and the need for a lasting peace rooted in the security of the populations, responsibility of the parties, and the restoration of confidence. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the DRC for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the briefers for their sobering briefings. As we convene today, my delegation remains deeply concerned by the reported recent development. The ongoing hostility serves only to prolong human suffering and further diminish the prospect for a sustainable peace. We are troubled by the continued escalation of military actions affecting civilian and civilian infrastructure. The protection of civilians, particularly children, the most vulnerable, and the preservation of schools, hospitals, and homes are non-negotiable obligations enshrined in international law. Our delegation reiterates that all parties must prioritize de-escalation and exercise utmost restraint. We remain convinced that there is no military solution to this protracted conflict. Dialogue and diplomacy remain the sole viable means to bring this crisis to an end. In this regard, we urge the resumption of the international diplomatic initiatives, in particular the trilateral talks involving the United States, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation. These engagements continue to represent vital steps toward a comprehensive ceasefire, and we hope they will lay the ground for a constructive path to peace. A durable and just resolution must address the underlying root causes of the conflict and be fully consistent with the United Nations Charter and the principles. Lasting peace will require compromise, confidence-building measures, and a shared vision of common sustainable security. In closing, Mr. President, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving resolution that restores peace, security, and stability in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I shall now make statement in my capacity as a representative of China. I thank Director Wosonu, SRSG Frazier, and Deputy Executive Director Chaiban for their briefings. China has noted the reported drone attack on a school in Starobelsk and expresses deep concerns over the resulting casualties, particularly those among students. China condemns any attacks targeting innocent civilians. A protracted Ukraine crisis, intensifying situations on the battlefield, and immense suffering of the people. These are the things that no party, including China, wishes to see. Lately, the parties launched a frequent and large-scale drone and missile attacks, subjecting more and more residential areas, schools, and civilian infrastructure to attacks. It is a very worrisome situation. We call on the parties to remain calm and exercise restraint, strictly observe international humanitarian law, effectively protect the safety of civilians, cease attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, promptly escalate the situation on the battlefield, and strive to bring hope for an early return to peace. The Ukraine issue is at a critical stage of dialogue and negotiations. In this context, what we need are goodwill instead of hatred, de-escalation instead of heightened tensions, and efforts towards the same goal instead of military confrontation. Although the momentum of negotiations has slowed down a little, and the major differences remain in the positions of the parties, if we can keep the talks going, we will see the dawn of peace. The relevant parties should redouble their efforts, demonstrate political will, show flexibility, take each other's legitimate security concerns seriously and address them properly, and aim to reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement at an early date. China's position on the Ukraine issue is objective, impartial, and consistent. Guided by the four shoes principle put forward by President Xi Jinping, we have always stood on the side of peace, dialogue, and humanity. We firmly support ending the conflict and reaching a political solution and have made extensive efforts to promote peace talks. Together with the international community, China stands ready to continue playing a constructive role for the political settlement of the crisis. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, distinguished members of this Council, before I proceed with my statement, I want to react to the invitation of Mr. Nebenzia. I'm not sure that I will have any appetite to visit Moscow. Even when Russia is defeated, even when and after Putin's regime has collapsed, even after Russia has paid war reparations, even when the next government in Russia were to beg on its knees for an apology, even after all the Russian war criminals will be sentenced, there will be no reconciliation between Ukraine and Russia for decades, maybe for centuries. I will even refuse to visit Moscow as a member of Ukraine delegation that will travel to Russia to witness Russia's signature of its declaration of capitulation. Mr. President, unlike on other occasions, I will refrain today from thanking the Presidency, and I will not extend the customary words of appreciation for the convening of this emergency meeting, as neither the facts nor the circumstances provide any legitimate justification for placing this matter before the Security Council this afternoon. What we have been witnessing over recent months, both at the previous meetings of this Council and today, is a shameless attempt by the Russian Federation to turn reality upside down and to present itself here as a victim. This recurring exercise in political theater staged by Russia in this chamber is not only entirely predictable, but also profoundly disrespectful to the members of this Council. The rationale behind this shameless performance, orchestrated once again by the Russian delegation in this distinguished hall, is as self-evident as the contempt it demonstrates towards its Council. The Ukrainian delegation wishes to express its profound concern that Russia having appropriated the permanent seat of the former Soviet Union at the Security Council under legally questionable and dubious circumstances, continues to exploit this unmerited privilege with growing cynicism and complete disregard for this council. It is truly alarming and disturbing that Russia, which hijacked this seat without any proper legal procedure, keeps abusing this privilege relentlessly and without the slightest sense of restraint or responsibility in a manner unworthy of a permanent member of the Security Council entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Sitting on the Council does not give Russia a license to spread lies and disseminate propaganda. If we would follow this logic, then Ukraine would be going to request emergency meetings of this Council every single day. If you, distinguished members of the Council, are ready to meet 5 times a week to address Russian atrocities against Ukrainian civilians, so is our delegation. Mr. President, just 3 days ago, we met in this chamber to address Russia's escalation of its war of aggression against Ukraine and witnessed new horrified reports about growing numbers of civilian casualties in Ukraine and Russia's barbaric war crimes. During this week, the brutality of Russian atrocities, as we just heard also from the distinguished briefers, against the civilian population only increased dramatically. 478 attack drones and ballistic missiles were launched against Ukraine in the last 3 days only. As a result of these strikes, 3 civilians were murdered and over 30 people were seriously injured. On May 20th, Russia struck the city of Konotop in the Sumy region with drones killing 1 person and injuring 11 civilians. A multi-story residential building was hit with floors from the 2nd to the 4th destroyed. On the same day, a missile struck, as we just heard from the report of Ms. Wosornu, a warehouse in Dnipro used by UNHCR, killing at least 2 people while destroying 900 pallets of humanitarian aid and shelter materials valued at over $1 million. It was the first attack by Russian armed forces on a UNHCR facility since the start of the full-scale invasion. Also, on the 20th of May, Russia shelled the city of Vilnyansk in the Zaporizhia region, hitting a private house and seriously injuring 4 civilians, including 2 children, a 2-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. Just yesterday, Russian troops attacked the city of Dnipro again, damaging residential high-rise buildings and injuring 19 people, including children, a 6-year-old boy, a 9-month-old girl, and a 13-year-old boy. The same day, Russian forces shelled Sumy using long-range artillery, with strikes recorded at 5 locations in the Kovpakivsky district. 3 people were hospitalized, including a 13-year-old boy. Today, Russia continued its attack across Ukraine, launching 124 drones overnight. While most were intercepted, several strikes hit multiple locations, causing casualties. Mr. President, let me repeat, all these numerous war crimes were committed by Russia just within the last 3 days. What is important to know is that all those facts regarding Russian crimes in and against Ukraine are not just well documented by our national investigative authorities, but also verified by independent international monitoring mechanisms. In particular, since 2014, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has been operating with full capacity to collect objective information and established facts regarding Russia's systematic violations of international humanitarian law. Detailed reports on Russia's crimes in Ukraine, including deliberate attacks and killings of civilians, are regularly published by this UN mission, as well as by the Independent International Commission on Inquiry in Ukraine, the OSCE Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and relevant Council of Europe monitoring bodies. Ukraine has nothing to conceal and fully cooperates with all these independent institutions. Mr. President, and now let us turn to the absurd accusations of the Russian representative regarding an alleged incident in Starobilsk that we just heard today. Russia has consistently denied, and we just heard this, they denied access to the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine since 2014 for all international monitoring mechanisms. There is no independent verification of all these baseless claims, as once again was confirmed by our distinguished briefers. So everything we hear today about Starobilsk is a pure propaganda show, nothing else. Such false accusations belong to a textbook disinformation campaign from Moscow designed to deflect from its own war crimes and manipulate international public opinion. These groundless allegations fit a well-documented pattern of Russian disinformation operations aimed at distorting reality, creating confusion, and evading responsibility. To establish the truth about what is happening in Starobilsk, as well as in other occupied towns and villages of Ukraine, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Crimea, all these territories must be liberated from Russian occupation, and they will be liberated. Mr. President, Ukraine again categorically refutes all false accusations regarding this incident in Starobilsk. Ukraine is exercising its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter to protect its people and liberate its own land from foreign occupation. Let me remind this Council, the Ukrainian city of Starobilsk was brutally occupied on the 3rd of March 2022 by the Russian armed forces. Now, according to reports that we have, only 20% of its citizens remained in this occupied city. And the truth is that Russian army has been using civilian facilities like drone operations unit who have been hunting civilians in Ukraine like a human safari since then, all the time. And it's also something that you have to remember speaking about this alleged incident. I would like to reiterate once again that Ukraine's defense forces operate under strict democratic oversight. They act in absolute compliance with international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. Ukraine only targets legitimate military targets and facilities used for military purposes. Our armed forces take every precaution to minimize collateral damage, unlike Russia's forces. The operations on the night of May 22 exclusively targeted the Russian war machine. The strikes successfully neutralized an oil refinery which was fueling occupation forces, ammunition depots, air defense assets, and also command centers. Mr. President, the hypocrisy of Russia's Federation knows no limits. The Russian representative routinely uses mirror propaganda, accusing Ukraine of the exact war crimes that Moscow commits daily. Russian troops continue to deliberately target Ukrainian cities as we speak, energy grids and residential areas, while Ukraine surgically dismantles the military infrastructure enabling those attacks. Mr. President, I would pose what is perhaps a rhetoric question to this chamber. For how much longer will the members of the Security Council, those who rightfully serve here, either by virtue of the UN Charter or by the trust vested in them by the General Assembly, continue to tolerate this cynical instrumentalization by Russia, this undisguised mockery at the hands of the Russian self-appointed impostors seated among us? One may look into history for guidance, and one finds there is a rather instructive parallel. Russia's claim to the permanent seat of the former Soviet Union bears resemblance to one phenomenon of the so-called Lzhe-Dmitry, false Dmitry, a pretender who briefly occupied the throne in Moscow under a borrowed legitimacy. For those who are less familiar with Russian history, Lzhe-Dmitry or false Dmitry was an impostor who claimed to be Tsarevich Dmitry, the younger son of Ivan Grozny, Tsar Ivan the Terrible. On that false claim of identity, he managed to seize the throne in Moscow in 1605, only to hold it for less than a year before his deception was exposed and his rule collapsed. In that sense, one might describe today's Russian Federation, without excessive embellishment, and not without irony, as a kind of UN collective false Dmitry. Россия — это ООНовский лжедмитрий.
Russia is the UN false Dmitry.
Permanent seat of this council, not through the established UN Charter procedures, but through manipulation and sleight-of-hand tactics. We are fully aware that it will not be easy to correct this fateful error of modern history and deprive the Russian Federation of its permanent seat of the Security Council that it hijacked through highly questionable means. But this decision is inevitable. It is just a matter of time. Mr. President, Russia is losing its aggressive war against Ukraine, not just in the battlefield. Russian troops have reached a breaking point. What we observe is a diplomatic defeat of Russia also here at the United Nations. It appears nervous, displaying visible signs of desperation. The very convening of this meeting is such a sign of weakness and an attempt to turn the tide and to squeeze a tear out of this council. Allow me, therefore, to conclude with a suggestion for my Russian colleague regarding his official report on today's meeting to Mr. Lavrov and perhaps also in copy to Mr. Putin. As you may anticipate, I will formulate it in a language that they are unlikely to misunderstand. So your telegram to Moscow, Mr. Nebenzia, shall be very brief. Шеф, все пропало.
All is lost.
I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for this statement. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked the floor for a further statement. I give him the floor.
Mr. President, I am very pleased at the knowledge of the Ukrainian permanent representative about Russian history, but with your permission, I will not enter into a dialogue with him because this is a pointless and there's a useless initiative. I would like to talk about something else. Frankly speaking, it is somewhat awkward, and I'm a little bit ashamed for certain members, colleagues of the Security Council. We knew that we would hear what we would hear from European members of the Security Council, something similar, but today their cynicism has reached staggeringly high levels. Not a single one of them deigned to even mention the dead children in Starobelsk. The representative of Denmark stated that that apparently that there's no access to them. Do you need access to rubble? Or perhaps you will allege that Russia itself did that, or these are computer-based graphics? You allege that you cannot, that there's no independent corroboration of this not being staged, but even the headquarters of the Ukrainian armed forces have confirmed that they struck Starobilsk. This is not even hypocrisy, not even double standards. This is a blatant mockery of child victims. We stated in we said in our statement that there are victims for you who warrant grief and those who do not warrant it. Hearing you, I'm talking about those present, the members of the European Union, those who are absent, is a mockery, a deflation of the feelings of those who suffered, irrespective on which side. How did we reach this point? European representatives do not view children, the young students of Starobilsk, the residents of Donbass, and the people in Russia as people. This does not dehumanize them. This dehumanizes you, those of you who are seated here making such statements. Are you really not ashamed of making such statements, saying what we hear today? This is a form of the dance on the bones of those who have perished. This is disgusting to me. I would have genuinely been sorry for you had it not been for your vile cynicism and mockery of the memory of the dead. Thank you.
I note that the representative of Denmark has asked for the floor. You have the floor.
To prolong this on a Friday afternoon, but I feel compelled to respond to the remarks by the representative of the Russian Federation. Unlike what was predicted by the representative of the Russian Federation before we all spoke today, where we were lectured about the kind of double standards we would show this afternoon, I'll just repeat what I said in my statement. Throughout this war, Denmark has consistently deplored attacks on civilians and demanded full respect of international humanitarian law without exceptions. There must be full accountability and justice for all crimes committed in the senseless war of choice launched by Russia. This, of course, includes any kind of killing or maiming of children, which we have repeatedly said in this chamber. So no, we do not feel shame. And actually, yes, we would like to have access, because this is exactly what we demand in any situation in this chamber. We would like to have independent verification so we know what we're talking about. It has not been possible in this hour. So thank you very much.
现在发言名单上。
There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.